Good afternoon, everybody, to an event at Bergen Kunsthall, talks, or actually several talks and other events, the closing weekend talks that we organized to close the show of Camille Norment that we had the enormous pleasure to host here at Bergen Kunsthall over the past months. It's a very beautiful day, and I welcome you, everybody, here in the space at Bergen Kunsthall and audiences online that are with us today. I said it's the last weekend of the wonderful exhibition Gyre by Camille Norment, the festival exhibition 2023, which provided for us the possibility to have experiences in the galleries and to reflect on these. And all these experiences are in some ways connected to sound and in some ways also to vibration. And we organized these talks today. We invited two prominent thinkers to talk with us about some aspects of theory and research that connect very deeply to Camille Norment's thinking, her work and research. And we thought it's a good thing to do that actually at the end of the exhibition, once we had all the experience to see the works and to experience them perhaps several times and basically to have a background to then think again through these experiences. And maybe like to summarize very broadly what we'll talk about today, it's all about sound, but in a very extended sense. We will not only talk about things we hear, we will talk about sound as something that connects us as humans to other humans and non-human actors in the world, objects, as something that sound as a vibration that is a form of life in itself. And it's a densely packed day. We have two talks. First by Gary Tomlinson and then by Nina Sun Eidsheim. And there will be further introductions to our speakers in a moment. But then we also welcome back Camille Norment here with us to have a conversation with these two speakers. That's starting at 4 o'clock. We've also scheduled roughly an hour for this. And then we have the amazing occasion to launch one of the final parts of this project, a book called Gyre, which documents the exhibition and some of the works in the exhibition, but also includes a text by Nina Sun Eidsheim. So this book will be available after the talks at 5 o'clock downstairs in the bookshop. And I welcome you all to join us, to have a glass and have a look at the book, purchase it, look at it. We're very happy that we have this book available in time. It's a great document that keeps us memorizing this exhibition and thinking further with it and through it. Yeah, the talks will be in English and they will be live streamed on streaming servers and on our website. I'm saying this also not just because we had to start very punctually, but also because there are cameras in the room. Please be aware of that. Your image might be captured if you do not move outside of the camera angle. I wanted to also thank our team who produced this event. My curatorial colleagues, Silja Leifsdottir, who will introduce the speakers in a moment, and Nora Svantje Almes, Sophia Maria Hamnes, Henrik Skauge on technics, and Lena Annette Koltweit here with us as well. Thank you, everybody. And yeah, toilets are also here on this floor and downstairs in the cafe and in the basement. So enough for me. Now I hand over to Silja, co-curator of the exhibition, who will introduce more about the speakers for today.
Hi everyone, welcome. So I will have the pleasure of introducing our first speaker for today, Gary Tomlinson. He's a professor of music and humanities at Yale University. Trained as a musicologist, his work in recent years has focused on issues of biological and cultural evolution in humans and other animals, resulting in an evolution trilogy, which is 1,000,000 years of music, the emergence of human modernity from songbooks, which is also part of this constellation room here upstairs, And on the evolution of human, that's on the evolution of human musical capacities. There's also the second book, Culture and the Course of Human Evolution, which is about the emergence of cultural complexity in ancient hominins, and his most recent book, just published in 2023, which is The Machines of Evolution and the Scope of Meaning. And there's also a few copies left in the bookshop downstairs. And Gyre Tomlinson will be talking about Camille Norment's exhibition in relation to the large forces resonating in it, especially forces that guide biological evolution. So I give the word over to you, Gyre.
I don't need that. Yes, thank you. Oops. Thank you. Thank you all for being here. Let's see if we can... Yes, well. And hold on. There it is. Thank you all for being here. I've been, these last 2 days have been my very first days in beautiful Bergen. I've enjoyed it very much. I've learned that it's the city where the sun always shines, which is lovely, lovely to see. And today I want to talk about especially 3 phrases or words that are very important to Camille Norment and very important to the experience that we have of her marvelous installations downstairs. The first of them is the phrase cultural psychoacoustics, which is a phrase by which she describes broadly many of the projects that she works on, cultural psychoacoustics. The second of them is the question of feedback, and feedback is really what I will be, in several different forms, is what I'll be talking about today. And the third of them, already mentioned by Alex, is Gyre. Gyre, is that more or less the pronunciation in the same word in Norwegian? Gyre, I start with Gyre. Gyre is a wonderful word. It's a very rare word in English. You don't hear it very often. And in fact, here is the most famous, by far, incidence of the word in English, The Second Coming by William Butler Yeats, the Irish poet of the early 20th century. I'll read this poem. I won't be reading off my screen too much, but it is a marvelous thing. You've all heard phrases from this, I am certain, because they circulate everywhere. Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart, the center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. Surely some revelation is at hand. Surely the second coming is at hand. The second coming. Hardly are those words out when a vast image of spiritus mundi troubles my sight. Somewhere in the sands of the desert, a shape with lion body and the head of a man, a gaze blank and pitiless as the sun, is moving its slow thighs, while all about it reel shadows of the indignant desert birds. The darkness drops again, but now I know that 20 centuries of stony sleep were vexed to nightmare by a rocking cradle. And what rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches towards Bethlehem to be born? An apocalyptic poem, a very dramatic apocalyptic poem. 1919, the apocalypse of World War I had just happened. He was reflecting that in part. Is it still current today? Well, I don't know. With the evil of Trump slouching towards Washington yet again in the United States, with half of the northern hemisphere burning and so on and so forth, it seems maybe apocalypse is now, but we hope not. But that's not the reason to get all apocalyptic myself, is not the reason that I introduced this. I wanted to get that notion of gyre in our heads, and I wanted to understand the idea of history that motivated this poem on Yeats's part. It was an apocalyptic view, but it was a view in which a vortex or gyre of tendencies accelerated and expanded until finally they came to a culmination and collapsed, at which point an opposed gyre began its own expansion, cyclic back and forth. A good gyre, that would have been for Yeats, the first coming, and the bad gyre, which he is seeing as a malevolent second coming. But the point about gyre, and the point about all of this excursus to Yeats, is that the gyre is a spiral. It is a cycle, yes, but it's a cycle that never repeats. It never ends up in the same place again, right? A continual dynamic process. And indeed, I want to say that feedback also is a continual dynamic process. And this is true even of negative feedback, that is to say, that feedback that is all about the control of mechanisms, the governing of mechanisms. So here's type one of my 4 types of feedback. This is the famous flyball governor, or flyball regulator, as it was called, that was invented by James Watt in 1788, I believe, late 18th century, invented by James Watt to keep his steam engine from flying out of control. And it's an ingenious mechanism. It works as the steam engine drives faster and faster, this drive shaft spins faster and faster. And as that happens, the centrifugal force pushes out the 2 balls on their hinge up here. And as that happens, it closes that scissor mechanism up there, pushing the lever up, pushing this lever down, and closing off the throttle of the steam, thereby, in a feedback mechanism, regulating the operation of the steam engine and keeping it from running out of control. So this is negative feedback. This is a negative feedback mechanism. We're all familiar with these from thermostats in our households and so on. But notice that it doesn't keep the steam engine operating at exactly the same pitch. The steam engine operates faster and then slower and faster and slower. It is a continual spiraling process of changing levels of operation, a continuing gyre, the feedback as a gyre. Now, this Watt flyball governor, this governor for his steam engine, became a very, very famous apparatus in the 19th century, and it entered right into debates about evolution in the middle of the 19th century, very interestingly. So here is how it did so. This is now Alfred Russel Wallace in a paper of his that he sent to Darwin in 1858, the year before Darwin published his Origin of Species. In this paper, Darwin found out that Alfred Russel Wallace was thinking about along lines very, very similar to his own. I'll come back to Darwin's thought. But the problem with evolutionary thought at this moment, the challenge that it was addressed to it was this question. There were those who felt that all of the species of animals and organisms across the earth had all been created as they were, and they had all moved across history in parallel modes. They all had stayed the way they were. And they said to the evolutionists, like Alfred Russel Wallace and Darwin, if this isn't so, if indeed from one organism or several primordial organisms, all of the organisms of the earth evolved, you need to tell us why it is that the earth is simply not filled with a spectrum, a smooth spectrum of organisms, but instead is filled with distinct species of organisms. So for that, both Darwin and, to answer that question, Darwin and Wallace had to come up with an idea, a theory of extinction. Not only a theory of the propagation of species, but a theory of the extinction of species. So this is how Russel Wallace used Watt's centrifugal governor. All varieties in which an unbalanced deficiency occurred, all varieties of organisms, could not long continue their existence. The action of this principle is exactly like that of the centrifugal governor of the steam engine, which checks and corrects any irregularities almost before they become evident. And in like manner, no unbalanced deficiency in the animal kingdom can ever reach any conspicuous magnitude because it would make itself felt at the very first step by rendering existence difficult and extinction almost sure to follow. That, then, is Alfred Russel Wallace's feedback mechanism for evolution and extinction, and the tendency of varieties to depart indefinitely from one another across the history of life. Here's Darwin's, and I'll do it very simply now. We'll come back to this later. This is Darwin's feedback mechanism, natural selection. You've got reproduction in a population of organisms. That reproduction is not perfect and perfectly faithful, but there's variety in the reproduction. There are changes from generation to generation. But that variety is happening in an environment of limited resources. The resources are not unlimited, so certain variants in the population have an advantage over others in reproducing. Hence, you get a selection of those variants, which feeds back into the population over time and gives you a different population. hence the divergence of organisms from their ancestral organisms. We'll come back to that. Now, here's the second type of feedback, and this is one that is particularly germane to Camille's wonderful exhibit. That is audio feedback, and we all know how this works, right? You've got a microphone, there's input. Feedback is fundamentally a question of of output turning into input, right? So you've got input into the microphone that is then output to a mixer here. This is an ad for a Harman Samsung automatic feedback suppression mechanism, right? You've got the microphone, it feeds into a mixer, that feeds into an amplifier, that comes out of a speaker, and if it comes out of a speaker and too much of it is picked up by the microphone, then certain frequencies, the ones in red up there, begin to be distorted, and you get the characteristic screech and whine of feedback. Well, this is bad feedback. This is not the feedback that we are hearing downstairs. It is the feedback that needs precisely to be suppressed, and that word, of course, is filled with political overtones. Political overtones that were realized in the 1960s in the popular music of the 1960s, because one of the places where feedback came to be good was precisely in popular music. And the Beatles, I have audio clips in both of the next two slides, and I'm not allowed to play them. Because apparently the algorithm bots will take down the whole streaming of the whole event, because this is fair use to put these clips in here, but they don't know that apparently, so the bots don't know that. So we are controlled by AI, of course, as we know. In any case, John Lennon leaned his guitar against the amplifier one day in the studio when they were recording the song I Feel Fine. Paul played his bass out of the speaker into John's electric guitar came the sound that it was picked up too much, and it resulted in feedback, and they said, hey, that's cool. Let's introduce our song with a little whine of feedback, which they did. It is certainly not the first use of feedback in popular music. There were guitarists in the 1950s who were doing this, but it certainly is the first #1 hit on the hit parade that began with feedback. There's no question of that. This is 1964. By 1969, of course, feedback had been entirely liberated. And this is a picture of Jimi Hendrix just after he performed the Star-Spangled Banner at the Woodstock Festival. If you haven't heard the Star-Spangled Banner recently or at all, YouTube his performance of the Star-Spangled Banner. It's quite extraordinary. It is absolutely bursting. What am I doing wrong here? I'm doing something right.
It's your beard.
It's my beard, I see, scratching the microphone. Not feedback, but interesting. In any case, Hendrix performed the Star-Spangled Banner with his, just for solo electric guitar, with a huge amount of feedback that burgeons throughout the performance. It was just a miracle of motivation for those of us that when we first heard it. And we have to try to kind of appreciate how dramatic it was. This was the 1960s. You know, it's not today in the United States, most sporting events begin with the Star-Spangled Banner, and every singer who takes it on embellishes and improvises a little bit and adds all kinds of things, right? You're not going to get a Beyonce to sing the Star-Spangled Banner without doing her own thing with it. That didn't happen in the 1960s. And for Hendrix to stand up at Woodstock and turn it into this psychedelic, distorted feedback extravaganza was an amazing gesture against the suppression, not only of feedback, but of course of the whole counterculture that was burgeoning at that time. Okay, audio feedback, bad, but also of course good. Let's see. So now we go back to Darwin for my third type of feedback. And just to review briefly and to expand a little bit on what I said before, you've got a population of organisms that is reproducing, that is leading to variant strains in the population because there's no such thing as absolutely faithful reproduction. But that's happening in an environment where the resources are limited because there's no such thing as an environment where the resources are completely unlimited. And that results in differential success on those different strains of the organism, differential success in their reproduction, which changes the overall makeup of the population of organisms, and so natural selection moves on, species diverge, and new species are created, and so on and so forth. Darwin's natural selection. there is absolutely no question that this is how the history of life on Earth worked, has worked, is still working. It has been proven in the laboratory at this, by this time. Even so, when people talk about the theory of natural selection, it's no longer just a theory. This is a proven theory, as proven as any scientific theory can be. Darwin's natural selection. But it is not the whole story, because there's something crucial that is left out. And what is left out has to do with the fact that the environment is also changing, right? Which is to say that there is no organism on Earth that is so light-footed that it doesn't change its surroundings at all as it lives, right? Organisms take in energy and matter from their environment, and they give out waste products to their environment. Those waste products often turn into resources for other organisms. All of the oxygen turned out by those green plants is obviously a resource for us. The carbon dioxide turned out by us, I suppose, is a resource for them, up to a certain limit at any rate. So what about the balance, the shifting balance between changing organisms and a changing environment? Well, this is where a new kind of feedback has entered into evolutionary theory over the last 30 years or so, and it is the feedback that is known as niche construction, niche or niche construction. So what you've got then is an environment. Because of it exerts certain selective pressure on the organisms in it, certain of those variants more successful at reproducing than others. But wait a second, those organisms are busy having their own impact on reshaping the environment. So a changed environment then comes around and exerts a changed selective pressure on the organisms. Both organism and environment are constantly changing in a dynamic feedback relationship with one another. Niche construction. This niche construction has, as I say, been taken in a big way into recent evolutionary theory. It is an attempt to really come to grips with the relationship of organism and environment in a way that Darwin's natural selection kind of didn't, and that mathematical models of Darwin's natural selection in the 20th century, in the 1900s, certainly didn't. Because, why didn't they? Because the mathematics of the multidimensional changes of environment are so complex that the mathematics that we have doesn't answer, can't in any rich way model that the back and forth changes between environment and organism. The organismal changes themselves are hugely complex and have to be reduced to something very simple for these models. Here's the standard view then of niche constructive feedback. You've got a genome in a population. That genome results in certain traits in the organisms in that population. Those traits alter the environment in certain ways. Those environmental alterations interact with traits in the same organisms or in different organisms in certain ways, and that results in natural selection of an altered sort on the genome of a population, either the same population you started with or other organisms that are involved in the same environment. A classic instance of this that is always trotted out as an example of this long-term niche construction is beavers. The castorid ancestors of beavers were not aquatic animals. The idea is that as beavers more and more took to felling trees to get their nutrition, knocking down, chewing through trees and knocking them down, they began to create, simply by accidental damming up of waterways, they began to create aquatic environments. As they did so, the selection pressure, the altered environment altered the selection pressure on these ancestors of beavers, such that any traits that came along accidentally that happened to enhance their aquatic capacities in these ancestors were now advantageous traits, and so they were selected. And so we ended up with beavers as aquatic animals in this interplay, as a result of this interplay between environment and organism. But hold on. Now let's think about niche construction a little bit further. We know that all organisms are open to their environments. Down to the very cellular level, every organism is open to its environment, right? It takes in input, it gives out output. I've already talked about that a little bit. But if that's true, then the niche construction that we're talking about is not something that only happens across eons. It's something that is happening on a moment-to-moment basis, right? It's happening at every moment as we interact with our environments. We are reshaping the niche, but the niche is having an impact on us. Well, you say, hold on, the niche having an impact on us, how is that happening? How is the niche having an impact on us when our genes are determining how it is that we interact with the niche? Well, here's how it is. The changing niche is changing the expression of our genes. Now, I have to be very careful in explaining this. I'm not saying that the changing niche, as I move through my life, my interaction with my environment is from moment to moment changing my genetic makeup. It isn't changing the nucleotide sequence on the DNA molecule in all of my cells. It's not doing that. It is, however, and this is what we have come to understand, it is, however, changing from moment to moment which of those genes on the genome are being expressed and how much they are being expressed, which of those genes are being suppressed. In other words, the regulation of my genome is being changed on a moment-to-moment basis, right? Which is, in effect, the same as saying that my genetic aspect facing out to the world is changing on a moment-to-moment basis. This now radicalizes niche construction. So that here's a very schematic and simple example. You've got some sort of chemical out in the environment, call it a hormone. It is received by a protein that is in the cell. As it comes through the cell membrane, it is received by it links up with a protein. That protein carries it into the nucleus of the cell, where in fact it latches on to certain regions of the DNA molecule, suppressing some genes and enhancing the expression of other genes, so that a different balance of proteins results from the transcription onto RNA and out into the cell. So you've got a cell that has been altered by an environmental stimulus in the very expression of its genes. This is extraordinary. And this is something that took a long time to catch on as an idea, but now it's very, very clear that this happens with all organisms all the time. For instance, radical niche construction in plant responses to environmental stress. We now know that if a plant is stressed because it doesn't have enough water, what that environmental stimulus will do, it will result in regulatory changes in the regulatory compounds in the cell that are regulating the expression of genes, such that within hours, even more quickly, certainly within days, that plant will be more resistant to its water evaporating off. It will resist the stress of the environment and be more successful in a dry environment. This is happening in all these plants one way or another, depending upon wetness or dryness at every moment. Differential changes in genetic expression. Radical niche construction in honeybees. In honeybee colonies, the worker bees, all of these thousands of female worker bees, they live about 2 to 3 weeks on average. Most of their early lives are almost always spent in the hive. They're tending to the brood, they're feeding the brood, they're stashing away honey and other nutrients that are brought into the hive. They're tending to things in the hive. Later on in their lives, they tend to shift through a number of genetic changes. They shift into foragers. And those same bees that were workers in the hive go out, flying out, looking for flowers, from which they bring back nectar and water and pollen. However, what we now know is that the regulation of the superorganism that is the honeybee hive is such that when the honeybee hive needs more nutrition, certain pheromones begin to circulate. Pheromones that, of course, are created by the genetics of the honeybees themselves, but keep in mind the feedback cycle that is going to change this genetic expression. Certain pheromones begin to, when the honeybee hive is needing food, certain pheromones circulate such that the transition from worker in the hive to forager happens more quickly. You get more foragers, they go out, they bring back more food, the balance, the economy of the hive is restored. When, however, the brood is too large, when in fact the brood is large enough to need plenty of tending to, and there's plenty of food to go around, when that happens, then the opposite happens. And the genetic changes that are induced by pheromones are such that the transition from worker in the hive to forager is slower, right? All of this is happening in these honeybee hives. All of this is about changes in gene expression. Radical niche construction, once again. So here's where we've been in regard to evolution. We've gone from Darwin's natural selection to niche construction to radical niche construction, and now I want to add in culture. When I think about culture, I talk about culture in a very broad way. Any social animal, here's my definition, my thumbnail definition of culture, any social animal that learns during its lifetime certain things from the animals it socializes with, and then teaches those things to the next generation, is a cultural animal. That is the essence of culture. Archives of knowledge that are learned during a lifetime that are passed on to the next generation. It's the essence of human culture. Our archives are very, very complex ones. But this definition of culture gives us many, many animals in the world that are cultural animals. There are thousands of species of songbirds that need to be thought of, I think, as cultural animals. Elephants, cetaceans, whales and dolphins, seals of certain sorts. There are lots of animals out there that learn things. Certainly, some of the primates, monkeys and apes, are also cultural animals. Judging where the boundary of culture is, where it stops, that's a little bit hard to do. But nonetheless, there are lots and lots of cultural animals out there, not just humans, right? In this broad view of cultural animals. So now I want to think then, I want finally to get back around to something like music. I want to get back around to sonic environments, and I want to play for you a marvelous film. I happened to be able to catch this on my camera of a British blackbird singing its heart out earlier this summer. This blackbird was I was standing on a table and trying to get it. It moves around. I'm not a great cameraman. Nonetheless, this wonderful bird. And I turned around almost in profile so as to say, "Okay, you want to see me sing? Here I am. I'm singing." So here is my blackbird singing its heart out in its own niche. Just getting going. And now he's just about done. And he's going to fly off. So we know an awful lot about... I hate to interrupt him. There he goes. And off he goes. We know an awful lot about birdsong, right? The song of this blackbird is made up of a number of different smaller bits that are put together, combined in all kinds of different ways. We understand the way in which songbirds teach song to each new generation, the way in which the song is learned. There's a period of songbird babbling, like babbling in human infants, where they don't quite have it right and they gradually put it together, their own species-specific song. It's a very, very complex thing. We know the circuits in the brain that are affected by this and so on and so forth. There are still fundamental mysteries about songbird, about the complexity of the singing of songbirds. The fundamental mystery being this, in essence: if indeed these songs are about get off my territory or come and mate with me, which seems to be what they're largely about, why all the complexity? Why has all this complexity been generated? We're missing something in the story of what these songbirds are up to with their songs, in short, and it is very, very interesting. But what we have not known until very recently is that the singing of these songbirds is a part of their constructing of, well, we've known that it's a part of their constructing of their niches. This is the sonic niche of these songbirds. But what we now understand is that the singing of these songbirds is altering the expression of genes in their brains on a moment-to-moment basis. Once again, we're faced with radical niche construction, right? At every moment, what we're finding is that the impact of hearing a song or the impact of producing a song, did that my beard again? Okay. The impact of hearing a song or the impact of producing a song is bringing about changes right down to the level of genetic expression. Again, radical niche construction. So here, these are just a few of the many articles that are showing this song-induced zinc gene expression in auditory pathways of songbird brain, and here's another one, gene regulation by song in the auditory telencephalon of songbirds. Here's another one, no small feat, microRNA responses during vocal communication in songbirds. MicroRNA are those little bits of RNA that are not coding RNA, but there are dozens of kinds of them, and they take part in the transcription whereby the DNA produces proteins. So this, too, is part of the regulatory mechanisms I was talking about before. Gene expression profile of the song control nucleus shows sex specificity, hormone responsiveness, and species specificity. All of this gene regulation changed on a moment-to-moment basis. It's extraordinary. This is then a cultural animal that through its culture is changing its niche construction, right? So then we need to think about biocultural niche construction when we're talking about cultural animals. We need to think about the selective pressure of the environment on an organism, but then the organism changing its environment not only through non-cultural behaviors, but through the nature of its cultural interaction with its conspecifics, other members of its species, or with the environment at large, right? Now we have an even more complex kind of network that culture is taken into, which is to say, with this radical view of niche construction in mind, there is no cultural evolution that is not also biological evolution in cultural animals, and there is no biological evolution in cultural animals that is also not at the same time, cultural evolution, right? These things are linked. And when people ask, is it nature or is it nurture? You need to say to them, well, that's the wrong question. It's always both. It's got to be always both. Okay. Now, human music. This is a very, very complex, evolved system. A hugely complex, evolved system by which humans it's part of the ways in which we construct our sonic niches. This evolved system, again, is the result of, in my view, a quite long evolution that is both biological and cultural, because we've been cultural animals for millions of years. That is, we and our ancestors, at least by the light of my own definition, my broad definition of culture. It goes back a long, long way in humans and their ancestors. Here are some of the capacities that are joined together in modern human musicking. And the first thing to know about modern human musicking is that we all do it, right? Every human being in normal development, in normal socialization, is a musician. The capacities that are built into our brains, either when we're born or it's much clearer it happens this way, the capacities that develop in the course of our normal socialization that enable us to deal with music are universal to Homo sapiens, right? So when people sort of say, oh, I'm tone deaf, I mean, there are some incapacities that are real incapacities, but most of the time they say that. It's not true. They can, for example, follow a beat, processing periodic rhythmic cycles, right? Following a beat. You would think that this is a simple thing because humans all do it automatically with normal socialization, right? We're aware of the cyclicity of the beat in much of the music we listen to, right? And yet, it's not a simple thing. The brain needs to be predicting the continuation of a regularity. It's a very complex thing that we're up to cognitively. And it doesn't go very far beyond humans in the animal world, at least as we've been able to discover so far, right? So following a beat, that's one of the aspects of human musicking. Processing certain kinds of oral stimuli as pitch. You know what I mean by pitch. It's the highness or lowness of a note, so to speak. Dom, bom, 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 bom. Pitch, the highness or lowness of a note, you would think, well, we hear that, and there it is out there in the world. Wrong. Pitch doesn't exist in the world. What exists in the world are certain kinds of oral stimuli that human brains turn into pitch. And that, too, is a cognitive feat of immense complexity that we're only beginning to understand. Do other animals process pitch the way humans do? Even songbirds seem not to, interestingly enough. That is to say, if we think that songbirds are musicking the same way we are, we're probably wrong. There are some fundamental differences there that we don't understand as well as we wish to. But processing pitch is a complex thing. We do it when, by the way, we come into it normally through normal socialization, once again. Processing several aspects of oral stimuli as timbre. Timbral differences refer to, say, the difference between the same pitch played by a trumpet and played by a violin, right? Those are timbral differences. We hear them, we categorize them, we do complex things with them, though that, too, is the result of evolved capacities, cognitive capacities. And even more interesting is the assemblage in our perception of certain pitches into groups of pitches. Musicians usually refer to them as scales, or in some musical traditions, they're chords, pitches that are sounded simultaneously. The conglomerating of certain pitches that seem to go with one another, even though they're different pitches, is yet another aspect of the complex cognition that we are naturally developing into in our infancy and early childhood. I think all of these things were in place by 60,000 years ago, which is about the most recent date that we have for when the lineage of Homo sapiens that came out of Africa and populated the whole world began its move. It not only populated the whole world, it moved back from Central East Africa to populate to merge with other Homo sapiens and populate all of that. We know that as it came out of Africa, it merged in some instances with Neanderthals. All of us people of Northern European heritage have more Neanderthal in us than people of African descent or Asian descent. Some people of Asian descent have more genetic ingredients of yet another species that only became clear to us 20 years ago, the Denisovans. We have only a few fossils of them, but enough to have sequenced the whole genome, just as we've sequenced the genome of Neanderthals. In any case, as this expansion was happening, I think that the lineage that expanded was already endowed with most of these capacities. The evidence of this is somewhat speculative, my thinking this, but the evidence of archaeology suggests that certainly by 43,000 years ago, the oldest date of the first flute-like instruments that we've discovered in southwestern Germany, as it happens. Certainly by that time, these capacities were probably in place. They are universal capacities. But the point is, and this is the point that is bringing me close to my conclusion, I've said it a number of times, when we are musicking, we are doing just as songbirds are when whatever they're doing in singing their songs, whatever we want to call it. When we are musicking, we are altering our genetic aspect toward the environment on a moment-to-moment basis, right? And the studies are now beginning to pour in. Here's one that says that recreational music making alters gene expression pathways in patients with coronary heart disease. It is right down to the genetic level that allows that and the changes of genetic expression that allow these coronary patients to relax when they engage in recreational music making, right? The music making itself, sent out into the world and by a feedback mechanism, comes back to change the very expression of our genome. Or another instance of this, the effect of music performance on the transcriptome of professional musicians. The transcriptome, that's a word that refers to all of these thousands of proteins and dozens of different microRNA molecules that regulate the transcription of our DNA, and all of those are, now we know that the effect of them is changed in professional musicians. Don't believe for a minute that once we look at it more closely, we won't find that it's also changed in non-professional musicians. It is changed in all of us, I'm absolutely certain. Okay, they've only done the testing on professional musicians so far, but we're getting around to these things. Music listening regulates human microRNA expression. Those microRNAs, again, the non-coding RNA that is involved in the regulation of genetic expression. Music listening, sitting down listening, right? So, this, of course, has everything to do with the fantastic installations downstairs, right? What Camille Norment has managed to do in her project is she's managed to kind of immerse us in environments where where we can sit back and begin to understand the impact on us of the sonic environment around us, where we can relax into that impact and kind of contemplate it, and more to the point, where we can sing along with it, where we can step up to those microphones in that fabulous room downstairs with the bell and the clapper or the horn and the mute, these fabulous, beautiful pieces that then are picking up and making their feedback not only out of things that are broadcast through the microphones, as I was learning from Camille just yesterday, that are broadcast through the microphones, but also are restructuring the feedback sounds that we hear on the basis of the noises that are picked up by the microphones from the people wandering through the hall. If you have time this afternoon, this exhibit is disappearing soon. Go down, don't just go down and walk around the hall. Go down and stand in front of one of those microphones and sing. It's great. It's not something that immediately kind of picks up, but it's something that is kind of cycled through and gradually the environment has changed. Well, my point is that, number one, there are 2 points, I guess, I want to make about all of this, and I've already made them too many times, I suppose. Number one, all of this is the result of a long and complex biocultural evolutionary history that enables this to happen, right? Maybe there are 3 points. Maybe there are 4. I don't know. Number 2, this biocultural evolution is just the cultural, is just the version in cultural animals of a niche constructive feedback evolution that characterizes all organisms of whatever sort, everywhere. Right? This is the kind of niche constructive gene regulation that all organisms are embroiled in constantly with their environments. And number 3. Back to human musicking. Musicking is one of those places. Everything we do, of course, is part of our niche construction. Language, of course, technologies, everything is. But musicking is one of those places where we can sit back with the help of Camille and artists like Camille. We can sit back and really kind of understand the kind of impact, both the output that turns back into input and changes us on a moment-to-moment basis. This is a marvelous feat, Camille. Thank you so much. I'm done. Thank you. What time is it? Thank you. Thank you very much. I think I kept to my 45 minutes.
It was so spot on.
There we go. How about that?
Incredible. So thank you so much. And we just wanted to say that if you have any urging questions that you're burning with right now, then we have a few minutes to take a few questions, and we will have a little break to go to the toilet and reset the stage. And then we also have the conversation in the end.
And there will be more opportunity for questions later on with all 3 of us. But if there are any questions now, please don't hesitate. It's a lot to take in. I do understand that. And I'm speaking in English, which you all speak. I know. I'm so envious of a bilingual nation, which the United States still resists being, even though there are countless bilingual people in it. So I apologize if I talk too fast and if some of it went by very quickly. But thank you for listening to my English. I wish I could have done it in Norwegian. Questions? Go ahead, please.
If I can, actually, I was wondering how memory plays into that, because in some ways, some processes that you describe could be also described as memory processes.
Yeah. Well, so what is memory? This is something that I take up in the newest of these 3 books that was mentioned in the case of songbirds. The question of how memory works in songbirds is one of those places, and how they memorize the songs. And what the impact of that memorization is then on their ongoing experience of song is much researched and very, very interesting. But we have to understand that memory is operating right down to the molecular level too. And students, scientists who study memory are beginning to understand the ways in which memory is part of the genetic regulation. The laying down of memory actually results from some of these regulatory changes of genetic expression, right? So it is it is absolutely an essential part of this picture. By the way, memory is an essential part of any cultural animal because there is not only the learning but the memorizing of whatever the cultural archive, as I tend to call it, is of that animal. The memory is going to be crucial. Memory in songbird is something that has been it's accessible to study. I hate to tell you some of the ways in which it is accessible to study because, you know, the study of songbirds has its brilliant, wonderful scientific side. It has also resulted in the deaths of thousands and thousands of songbirds, right? They don't just kind of do these studies in the wild and so on. They do other things with songbirds. I'm tremendously ambivalent about that, as one has to be. I think about gaining our knowledge through, you know, victimizing others and other animals, but there it is. But in the course of this, they have begun to understand very, very precisely the way in which memories of songs are laid down, become solidified, then can be altered, or are a part of the production of the song by the reproduction of the song by the bird involved. So yes, absolutely, memory is crucial. Yeah. I'm hearing the feedback from downstairs. That's great. I'm going to come over closer to you.
Thank you. That was really exciting.
Thank you. Thank you.
I guess one way where I go with what you're saying is, what are ethical implications of, you know, if everything that is put into the environment has an implication, do you think about the ethics of that?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, so I just raised some ethical implications, which are one aspect of that, but that's you're asking a much bigger question, and I understand that. You know, one of the things that there's a move afoot in the humanities in universities, not only in the United States, but in Europe as well, called posthumanism. And this posthumanism, in one of its versions, is about understanding the place of humans in the world in a trans-species way, and understanding the commonalities, the things that we share with other species. I think that what is crucial is not some romanticized, oh, isn't it wonderful that we share all these things with other species? One needs to understand both the differences and the shared aspects. One needs to explore, for example, humpback whale songs. There is so much we don't know about this, right? We don't know about what it is activating across whole ocean basins in the cases of these extraordinary animals. You know, the sperm whale click codes, as they're called, which are their own version of whale song, they were only discovered in the 1990s, right? We've only barely begun to scratch the surface as to what these might be up to. And meanwhile, we're killing these animals, you know, and continue to kill these animals. Even if we're not whaling, we are going out there with sonar, with making all kinds of industrial noises in the oceans that also kill the animals, you know. Posthumanism is an opportunity in my book, and this kind of work is some gesture in that direction, the best I can do. It's an opportunity in my book to really move towards a kind of activism on the part of a scholarly activism. Yes, it's scholarly, and yet it is realizing that in the simplest terms, we all live in one world, and at every moment that we construct a niche, we are constructing the niches of other organisms. And this notion of niche construction as an ongoing dynamic, that is a dynamic that involves then, of course, I was doing it in the simplest terms. Here's a honeybee constructing its niche. But the honeybee in constructing its niche is constructing the niche of the flower, and vice versa. And on it goes, right? You've got not only millions of years of evolution of pollinating flowers that need pollinators, but you've got then the momentary changes in the niche construction that are going on there. We can't escape the networks that we are in, and we are the most destructive footprint anywhere in those networks across our world. We need to do better, clearly. Our politicians are not going to get us there, it seems to me. Certainly in the United States, they're not going to get us there. So we need to find ways to get there, and I don't know, this kind of work is a small gesture in that direction. I realize it's a rather pitifully small gesture, but it's I don't know. As I age, it's what I'm able to do, basically. Yeah. So yes, I do. I try and think about it. There must be more to that question that I'm not getting at. Go ahead.
I think, you know, as as someone who's attempting to make art or cultural making,
yeah.
it also, what you're sharing, and maybe also in the context of this exhibition, like the incredible responsibility of expression from humans, and just to keep remembering that we're part of, like, there's just a lot of responsibility in what we put into that atmosphere.
Right. Well, one of the beautiful and precisely ethical aspects about Camille's exhibition is precisely the way that it makes us take stock of an environment. Right? We think we're always taking stock of the environment. Of course, many of us are doing it more than we used to, and all that's to the good. But to truly take stock of the momentary shiftings around us of our environment is something that that many of us, at any rate, are not all that used to. But to bring our attention to such a taking stock, to make us pause, listen. And just on the sonic level, or pause and listen in a space and understand the space differently than we did before. The notion that it's actually changing genetic expression in us as we do so is just a bonus for me. But other questions? There will be time later on after our conversation. Thank you all.
There will just be a few minutes break. 3:15, we'll meet here again. We'll just have to swap Max. So please, if you want to use the toilet, and then we'll meet very soon again for the next speaker. Thank you so much. Okay, so we're live, back again. Welcome, everyone. I will now start with introducing our next speaker up. So we have Nina Sun Eidsheim. Is a professor of musicology at UCLA Herb Alpert School of Music. Her recent publications include Sensing Sound, Singing and Listening as Vibrational Practice, which is also here in the library and the Constellation Room, and The Rays of Sound, Listening, Timbre and Vocality in African American Music. In 2020, she founded also the UCLA practice-based experimental epistemology research peer lab dedicated to decolonizing data, methodology, and analyzing in and through multisensory creative practice. Her current projects include a book collaboration with Adada Leo Smith and a multimodal project that maps networks of metaphors that structure musical community, discourse, and practice. And with this, I will just give the word to Nina on the stage that will tell us a little bit of what she will talk about. Thank you.
Tusen takk. Ja, der var Nico. MFK. Vi har rett jersey her i Bergen. Men er det fordi ikke jeg gjorde den trøttskjegget. Akkurat. Skal vi se. Sånn. Den var litt rar. View. Full screen. Der, ok. Ok. Hei, tusen takk for invitasjonen hit til Bergen. And thank you so much for, especially for being allowing me to be part of this closing exhibition event. I think it's very special that many of you have already had time to visit the exhibition and probably come back more than one time, I would imagine. That's certainly what I would have done if I had the chance, if I lived here. So again, it's very special to be able to talk about this at the closing weekend. And it's also a special honor to be here with my colleague, Gyre Tomlinson, just colleague in spirit, not in a location. Gyre's, I don't know if you know, but he's one of the really most preeminent musicologists and thinkers in the United States and maybe in the world. So I know you're shushing me, but this is the truth. And your work has been very important to me for a long time. And thank you to Alec, Axel, Silja, Sofia, Henrik, Olena, and many more people, I'm sure, who have been part of putting this event together. And of course, finally, to Camille for creating this wonderful work that we'll be talking about today, that we're talking about today, and for your presence and for the conversation that we will be having. So while you can hear my Molde dialect, but I've been living on the different West Coast for more than 20 years now, that of California. And, but my dad is Stril, which is the thing you call people from this kind of region. And he grew up in a tiny village which shares the name of me, or I share the name of it, Eidsheim. It's between Ostereidet and Eikangervåg, if you know the local geography here. It's about a 40 minutes drive from here now with a bridge and things like that. Before it was much longer. And growing up, my family would drive from the Nordvestlandet to Eidsheim every summer, and it would take 7 ferries at that time. Again, now because of tunnels and bridges, it takes much shorter, or you don't need all those ferries. But it was quite a huge trek. And I recall one time that we went from the farm on the village Eidsheim to Bergen. We were going to have a big family outing, and we're going to see something really exciting. But we didn't make it all the way to Bergen. We just got to Åsane because that was where our stop was. It was a big life event for me, and kind of like a national event too. It was the opening of IKEA. And I got to go in to IKEA. And I will say it was a truly transformative multisensory experience. Growing up amongst cows outside of Molde, I had never been in that kind of constellation, and I know that's a kind of key word for Camille as well, that kind of configuration. And what happens, even if you've been out in the open fields, and that's a big expanse, something still does change when your body is in a kind of enclosed space that is enormously large. So it was a multisensory experience, and one that really sat with me, and as you can see, all today. And it happened so that I actually didn't have a chance to go to a museum or a concert before I went to college. So it was one of my big, I don't know if I should call it art event, but one of my big, defining events in my life. But now I've seen many works, and what they all, and experienced many, amazing moments of music. But what they all have in common is really this, like one's sense of self changes in an instance. Who our skin and the thing that's inside our skin suddenly comes into question. And I think that's, to me anyhow, what we're here to talk about today. Gyre has talked about it in these huge, big dimensions, millions of years. I think Camille has put all this together into 4 rooms in sequence, and it changes something with us in an instance. And what is that moment? I think that's what we're trying to unpack, and I'm finding that I can't really get to the center of what that is, and that's really intriguing to me. And there are really 2 artists that have been very central to this kind of thinking, trying to figure out what it means to not be able to make sense of something in a kind of big way. And it's somebody who was mentioned in the introduction. His name is Wadada Leo Smith. He's actually living in the same place as Gyre, outside, like 2 hours outside of New York City, and Camille. And I was thinking of talking a little bit about Wadada's work today, but I didn't get the time to. I think it's going to be too long, so I'm going to not do that. But I encourage you to look up his work. And I know he's also been an artist that Camille has looked to. He's a composer, philosopher, and trumpet player. But so Camille's work is, I got familiar with in around 2008 with her piece Triplight, which is a dynamic light sculpture, and it's described as, I never got the chance to see it myself as an installation, but I know that it's made of a 1955 Shure microphone, one of those iconic microphones, and it plays with lights and shadows and the shadows are cast on the wall, so it also reconfigures what maybe is being propelled from the microphone. Here it's a shadow rather than sound. In Camille's provocations downstairs, I'm really put face to face with the limitations and the limits of language and trying to make sense of something. I think we're really we have a sense-making drive, and I'm at the very edge of that ability myself when I meet Camille's work. And in trying to apply language to work, I am reminded of Norwegian novelist Karl Ole Knausgård's observation that through language, and this is his phrase here, translated into English, a particular view of the world comes into being. And if a particular view, and maybe you can call it niche, right? If a particular view of the world comes into being through language, the edges of that niche or of that world also shows itself, where there are experiences and moments a given language does not have the capacity to engage. Being confronted with those edges can fundamentally call into question how we ourselves figure in the world, but it can also call into question whether the language inherited has the capacity to reflect our imagination. Like, does the language we own, that we have in our mouth today, have the capacity to reflect our imagination? And again, that's the kind of edge I walk to when I'm in Camille's installation. The way that I have learned to think about sound and music through primary school, Music Conservatory, and then doing a Ph.D., has been about trying to define sound, define music. Is it noise? Is it music? Is it sound? Is it silence? What is this pitch? And I say pitch very conscientiously here. What is this pitch? That's a question we're being asked about, and we're supposed to hear and notate it down. We have tests and things like that. And we can be right and wrong. A pitch can be in tune and out of tune. So all that kind of logic imagines a fixed world, a fixed known world. So scales are known. They exist in the world, and then we go out into the wider world and we try to find them. We find this pitch or that pitch, and then we find sounds that are outside of them. They're out of tune or false, as we say in Norwegian and in German as well. So it's this logic of fixity and of being right and wrong. It's a kind of world of fidelity and then or a kind of philosophy or fidelity, and then we go and compare the world and say, are you fidel? I forget how you say that in English. Are you not fidel? Are you loyal to that ideal? And when I take, and you know, we can do wonderful work with that kind of framework. It's a framework, and lots of books have been written using that framework. Our field, musicology, has been using that framework for hundreds of years. But when we take that framework downstairs, it breaks apart, or it doesn't match. I don't have words to apply downstairs to the piece downstairs. So that suggests that Camille's imagination is broader or outside of that imagination of that specific language. And I also wanted to mention that this kind of ideals is interesting. I was just thinking of one of your new colleagues, Gyre. His name is Danny Walden, a music theorist. And he's observed that the word pitch, I don't know if you know in Norwegian, but or those of you who speak Norwegian as a primary language, that you can pitch a tent. So you put the stakes of the tent down into the earth. So a pitch, like a musical pitch, a note, is the same as pitching, like pinning something down. So that's really what we do with our imagination, or what we do with sound, if in our imagination we have this very fixed notion of sound. So reflecting on all these things, and what to say about Camille's work when I don't have words to use, I read a book, a wonderful book, which I recommend. It's by Sigrid Núñez. It's called The Friend. It's a novel. And I felt a strong resonance with one of Núñez's passages in particular, and here it is. She writes, I know people who strongly object to pet naming. They are of the same ilk as those who dislike the very idea of calling an animal a pet. Owner, they don't like very much either. Master makes them see red. What irks these people is the notion of dominion, the domination over animals that humankind has claimed as God-given right since Adam, which in their eyes have always amounted to nothing less than enslavement. Núñez continues, everyone knows the first thing Adam did with the animals that the Lord formed out of the freshly created earth, the first sign of his domination over them, his dominion over them, was to give each one a name, cat, dog. And until Adam assigned them their names, some say the animals did not exist. You come into being through a name. And Núñez goes on to recall, and I'm quoting her here again, a story by Ursula K. Le Guin, in which a woman, not named but unmistakably Adam's partner, Eve, undertakes to undo Adam's deed. Eve persuades all the animals to part with the names they've been given. Once all were unnamed, she can feel the difference, the downing of a wall, the closing of a distance that had existed between the animals and herself, a new sense of oneness and equality with them. Without names to separate them, there is no more telling hunter from the hunted, eater from food. The inevitable next step is for Eve to return to Adam the name he and his father gave her, and then to leave Adam and join others who, by accepting namelessness, have freed themselves from dominion. For Eve alone, though, these acts entail another renunciation of the language she shared with Adam. Do we depart? Can we no longer be together if we don't accept the names? But then, one of the reasons for doing that was that she, in the first place, she says, the talk was getting them nowhere. Well, so Núñez and Le Guin shows us the distinct game of power that can take place through naming, and how relationships can be disrupted through unnaming. Another creation story I read some years ago comes to mind, and this is the last one, is that of cryptocurrency. In the New Yorker article, from back when crypto was a new currency, it was asked what it was and how it worked. One of the engineers interviewed said, at a certain point, you break through it, you come to understand it all, and then the door closes behind you, and then you just get it, but you can't explain it. All the words you use to explain it are words people on the other side of the door don't understand. As the founder of the cryptocurrency Ethereum said, it's definitely nice to eke out some complete parallel kind of world. If language is consciousness, the investigative journalist Nick Palmgarten said in this article, it can, as well as pinning us down, as Adam did, right, also create pathways into new world, as Eve did when she unnamed herself. Naming is without the question an expression of power. However, power can flow from different sources. Yearning for models through which to make sense of experiences can also mark honest participation in what the social justice activist Adrienne Marie Brown calls the imagination battle. So that's her phrase, imagination battle. An essential strategy to liberatory politics, she claims. So we're here, I think, today to reflect on the piece downstairs. And as I was talking about, it's very, very hard to describe it with the language I have. It's not a question in Norwegian or English or Spanish, which are the kind of language worlds I live in. It's a more a question of whether we have really this kind of deeper foundational conceptual tools to imagine it with. We walk in and there's an invitation, I believe, to interact with the structures that are there. The shape of them reminds us of benches, so maybe they're benches. And I think many people know they're benches. They name them benches, and they sit down. I've seen people lay down on them. I've seen people kind of hold around them. I've seen people just having their little chats. There are all kinds of things happening on those benches. You can look to your right and to your left, and you'll see that it's a continuous space. And then maybe if the talking calms down, you'll start to hear sounds from each of the spaces, and you wonder, is that a mistake? Again, the right and wrong kind of thinking, right? And you start maybe to say, oh, all these spaces are connected. Is it one piece kind of dispersed into 4 spaces, or is it 4 pieces or more? If you go and look at the distinct objects and moments inside each of these spaces, are there distinct moments that are kind of connected because they're inside 4 connecting spaces? There's so many questions being brought up if you go down, or when you engage with the spaces downstairs. I saw all kinds of participation between people and the pieces. People are looking inside the bell, they're wondering what it is. They look up and look at the microphones. So the body is a kind of, you could say, like Camille is maybe a choreographer. She puts the body into all these kinds of movements to try to understand and interact and see and hear the piece. There are visual imprints of vibrations. For instance, on the paper sheets, I want to just call it like the most technical thing I can. There are papers hanging, and you see a kind of visual imprint of vibration on them, or there are dust that has been fixated on the paper, that has resulted in that pattern is a result of vibration. And there is an imprint on the wall around the coils, and that is also a result of vibration. The rust having being excited through the vibration and falling on the floor. So it's a kind of painting on the floor as well. The solid has been bent. Train tracks have been bent. That's not supposed to happen, right? So we're really, our material world is put into question. And the dimensions of us and the space is, again, like my IKEA experience, is in a kind of constant dynamism. As each of these objects seem very different when there are a lot of people around them versus when you're there alone with them. And as you know these, I can just try to describe these in a very material way, because I don't really have a way, again, with my current language, of really thinking through them. Gary just talked about the kind of process of feedback, and I know there are a lot of technical processes of feedback downstairs, and maybe you can think about it. I know we can discuss how these works within each piece, but maybe we could discuss how it works between the spaces, between the people in the spaces, and between the socio-political world that people bring with them into the space, and the space is a result of. But maybe if we go inside that process of feedback, not just think about the moments that are feeding. And I was thinking, actually, feedback is a kind of memory in itself, right? Because something is fed back, and you have to kind of remember it for it to come back, return. But what if we kind of creep inside and go inside that process of feedback? What do we find there? That's what I am very, very interested in, trying to understand what one such moment is. And in the book that Silja mentioned, Sensing Sound, Singing and Listening as a Vibrational Practice, I think about music or sound as what I call an intermaterial vibrational moment or practice. And that helps us move away from this notion of fixed pitch. And so again, my thinking has always wanted to kind of go inside the moment and try to understand what it is in that moment and time. And as I've already mentioned, Camille has helped me so much in thinking about that, because I think what her work does is to put us in all these different prepositional relationships to the world. Prepositions, preposition. So in different relationship, above, under, on the top of, next to, right? So in the catalog, what is it called? In the catalog, this is the catalog, I offer some of the kinds of prepositional questions that Camille's work brings up. And instead of kind of searching for something very fixed, when is the feedback, or what is feeding back if I sing "oh" here, when will I hear it return? And that's a kind of fidelity kind of question, right? So instead of thinking about that, how can we find another framework to think about sound and music and vibration through? So I'm going to try. Let's see if this will wake up now. Nico is... Here we go. Oh, it did that weird thing again. Okay. So, instead of this kind of fixity, I was trying to think of something that we can conceptually, because that's the thing with language too, you know, I can just figure out my own language, but if I'm not connecting, like Adam and Eve, are they going to be in completely different niches now, where they're not interacting? I want to interact, right? So I have to find some kind of language that we can think through together, or at least that's my desire. So I have been testing so many kinds of frameworks, and I came to, I don't know if I'm going to land on this, but where I am now is the concept of terroir, or the very concrete thing, terroir, you know, which is just earth. But many of you maybe, when you see this word in French, think about the word in French that has been, you know, directly translated to other languages, I think both to Norwegian and English, that we say terroir still, when we think about the way that the earth and the environment leaves its taste in the thing that we eat. And I think it's been mostly developed, this thinking within wine, but also people do talk about that in all the vegetables and fruits, etc. So there are different schools of thinking about terroir, but the most kind of conservative school says terroir is only the soil. Only and we can think, I know here, my dad always talks about how they had to take all the rocks out of the soil before they could plant anything. So there's very rocky soil, there is very clayey soil, there is sandy soil, there is rich soil, etc. So that will, of course, affect what kinds of minerals the plant will receive. There's a climate, overall climate, the winds, the temperatures, the amount of precipitation, the amount of sun, etc. There's a carrier. Some people includes also the grapevine or the plant itself, saying that it has a very distinct character, and the character of that plant in combination, in interaction with the soil and the climate, creates a particular kind of situation, a particular kind of event. And then some people even include growing traditions into this notion. So what kinds of cultural traditions in tending to the plants are in play? So if we want to use this as a kind of model for our way of thinking about sound and music, and maybe what happens downstairs when we go and spend time there, I wanted to think about the body oh, here we are. I forgot that I had these. Here's, I don't know, a Merlot. It has roots. All the nutrients coming up into the roots, signified by these different colors and different sizes, and the climate, different things in the earth, in the air, pollution, water, sun. And all of these little bubbles, this is just illustration, will end up in the grape. And then if I give my grapevine to you and have you, Axel, grow it in your garden, the same grape, we can understand this conceptually, the actual same plant will be expressed differently in your yard versus in my yard in California, and the same if you take it home to Nordland, it would be different. So same but different. If we now think about maybe the body as music's terroir, if we go downstairs and we think about the things that are actually happening maybe through us, when you hear my voice now, you are your own speaker of me, not just these speakers, but that you actually hear my voice means that your eardrum is vibrating and sending those signals to your inner ear, so you are your speaker of me. And what I wanted to show you here too is that we are not even fixed. There's a lot about evolution and changes in Gary's talk. We are not a fixed person, so I'm here now, this is my physicality. The first picture is when I was 2 years old, and there's nothing, probably not the molecule, nothing physically shared, but we can still conceptually think that this is the same person. So when this body, Nina, meets Camille's benches, for instance, it wouldn't be the same physical Nina at different moments in time. So the environment could be something like the acoustic, for instance, in a space, and I know that Camille does very close studies of the acoustics of each space that she works in. It could be the social environment, the psychological and cultural environment that I know Camille is very attentive to as well. It could be this region, etc. And carrier could be the music, the thing, or the sound, the kind of signal that we think that is being excited in the space. And traditions could be the frameworks, the musical frameworks and practices, or the art sound installation frameworks and practices, or the scientific frameworks and practices that we bring to it. So here is the kind of model that I described, that I was taught during primary school, conservatory, etc. It tells me there is an A, the pitch A in the world. It's 440, etc., etc., etc. You go out and find A's, or you go out and there's an A and there's an A and there's a out-of-tune A, for instance. So there's so the A's here depicted as a diamond. There's this very fixed thing that exists, and there can be false diamonds, like wrong diamonds. And we see it's in some sky, in the air, there is ground, we have a chair and some people. But if you use this terroir concept, right, each of these people will have a different physicality. They would have eaten different food, they would have been tended to in different ways. They're unique material beings. And they're in connection, we're never, there's no empty space around us. My skin is completely connected with air, which is also materiality, and with the ground, etc. This is all materially, continuously, and that's why, again, you can hear my voice, because my voice is traveling through the air, which is a materiality into your inner ear, to your eardrum, etc. So we should be also taking that into account. So now we say again, go out into the world, find these things that we know: noise, music, quiet, silence, sound, silence, etc. Go and recognize these things. If you do music degree, we'll put the red mark if you put the wrong note, or if you sing a false note. But if we use the terroir kind of model I'm thinking about today, is there a way to kind of have the same and different? Is there a way that we can all go into the space and recognize the sameness of experiencing Camille's work, and the difference by bringing our own materiality into interaction with it, and it being played uniquely through me, you, and you, and you. And if you return tomorrow, maybe we had some bubbles this afternoon, you'll be another material entity. So this is kind of experimental proposal of how to try to think about the kinds of experiences that we have had here over the summer with Camille's work. And I think, in this wonderful way, Camille's work is drawing on all this research from so many fields. I know you're very deeply steeped in kind of the traditional music history, so he's drawing from that, with that knowledge. And it creates a very unique kind of experience for us. But the uniqueness of that experience is actually to be found outside in the world too. I think what you're trying to show us is that this is actually the way it kind of is, but I'm showing it to you now, and you're taking the time to come and reflect, and then you can bring it with you, because this is really the world that we live in. And I just wanted to share, before I go into my conclusion, I wanted to share that if we think about the work through this terroir metaphor, there's so many ways to start a kind of analysis and a reflection on it. But two things that just came into mind, actually into my son's mind yesterday when we walked into the space, because Nico got the chance to see some of Camille's work in New York when he was presented there last summer. The bell, for instance, was there. So we walk into the space and he said, "Oh, is it the same bell? It's so small." It's the exact same bell, and we heard about how hard it was to transport it. But the whole space transformed the bell, or the bell transformed this space, because I'm sure you've never seen your space like this before either, with that, I call it the bell, with the bell inside. So immediately, it's the same, but different. And then the other reflection was, wow, people here are just talking and talking, and they're like so curious, and they're interacting, and in New York it was just, I don't know, I can't imitate Nico, but it was very different sociality, and also very different interaction with there were very different structures that sound was being transmitted through than the benches, let's say, that is in the front space, or the first space. But the way that people are interacting with it here is quite different from the way that a kind of similar structure, very different but similar, was interacted with in New York. At least I went there many times, and I never saw the kinds of interactions that I saw here yesterday and today. So we have to have a way to take that into account, right? Not one is not wrong and one is not better or worse or this or that. It's the terroir of that moment and the sociality of the people. So this, shows ethics were brought up in a question, a really beautiful question earlier, and it shows the kind of ethics that I think is forefront in Camille's mind, that she's really bringing people out in the work, and she's taking very much care of people. She's not only bringing them through the space, but she's also thinking about that. I think maybe you haven't thought about this term before, but I think in some ways you're thinking about the way that you are doing something to people, right? We can talk about that in the conversation afterwards, but that actually people are physically transformed and changed when they're interacting with the work downstairs, but really, with anything in the world. So when we are, or we are physically touching each other. We are in a vibrational moment together. So any kind of thing we do in the world is really not just a signal that can be transcribed, but it's physically touching people. And as we, in a way, kind of know this already, and all of you, I'm sure, have learned about the physics of sound, so what we're talking about in that dimension is not new to you at all. So one of the questions I'm left with is, why is it so hard to develop a kind of language and framework to think about this through? And I thought sometimes that maybe it's like one of those scenes, when there is a prisoner or somebody is locked into a house or somewhere and the door is actually open. They just think the door is closed, so they are stuck there because they just don't test the door and see whether it's open or not. Is it that kind of situation that we think we're closed within a language, but we can actually open the door? We just don't know. But the more I've thought about it, I think it's not just passive. It's not just passivity. I think it's active resistance, sadly. And the storyline that I think really illustrates this is of of the Japanese Lieutenant Hiro Onoda. Has any of you heard about him before? Well, he fought, check this out, the Second World War until 1974. He fought the Second World until 1974. How's that possible? And I wonder, sadly, if his absurd tale provides a more provocative model for our kind of stagnant way of thinking about sound, music, and each other. For the Japanese people and those interested in the Pacific War theater, Onoda is known as the heroic personification of selfless service. Trained in counterterrorism, as his colleagues were evacuated in 1944 from the Philippines, Onoda was asked to stay behind and hold his position in the jungle on the island Lubang until his unit commander returned. Applying his military training and fueled by his unmatched loyalty, Onoda operated undetected and unreachable in the thick jungle for 3 decades. In the years after the war ended, the Japanese sent numerous search parties. So again, it's not like he could walk out and he didn't know. The Japanese sent numerous search parties. They tried to communicate via leaflets and other written messages. Onoda's brothers spoke to him via loudspeakers from a helicopter flying, because they knew the general area, flying over him. As did his father. His father recited haikus, self-written haikus. But with each attempt, Onoda's hermeneutic was guided by the belief his training had ingrained in him. Everything is enemy deception. The leaflets, they're false. It's the enemy trying to say, get me out. My brother's message, they have a gun to his head. He's just talking because, they want me to come out. My dad's haikus, again, gun to his head. He interpreted each desperate communication attempt from his family as the enemy's effort to weaken and capture him. Dan Piepenburg describes this decades-long communication campaign as an exercise, his quote, sublime futility. Living for 30 years as a millenarian cult, anticipating a salvation that never came, Piepenburger describes, the action was all in the future and all in the minds when the war is over, right? Within such a world, every sign is read within a completely insulated interpretive and sensory system. Insulated, it's insulated, right? Every experience and message that could have told Onoda that the war was over was doomed, as each missive was automatically framed as enemy deception. To be an accepted, upstanding member of a culture, of a society, of a music class, is to have been trained as a counter-terrorist. Like those undergoing counter-terrorist training, whether within the general listening culture or from primary school to music conservatory, we are taught to actively disregard pointers that might suggest alternative ways of experiencing music. Within this frame of mind, the more logical and compelling the countermessage seems, the louder the enemy alert is sounded. Like Onoda actively dismissing all signs of communication, practitioners are trained within a musical apparatus in which ideology and ethics actively resist any sign or experience that suggests there are other musical worlds. Neither counter-terrorists nor practitioners of this music are unaware of their potential freedom. But the systems have actively trained them to dismiss and to frame as enemy traps, even dispatch that gives evidence of the limits of their world. By illuminating the patterns and paradox that make up one epistemology, which we wish not to extinguish, but to knock it off its perch and to see it for what it is, one constructed system among other. As Onoda's story illustrates, a system in isolation maintains a terrorist's fevered fantasy. And to me, then, the parallel is this. Critics and theorists and scholars tend to be like Onoda, and I think people in general. As people who appreciate a no culture, no in quotation mark, right, art and music, we are locked into a system of isolation, the more of an expert we are, the more people would listen to us, like to Gyre and me and Camille now, the more of a counter-terrorist we maybe are. We are locked into a system in isolation, into a language with which we can easily trade and pitch ideas fast to the ground, like vibrations, pitching it into a scale. Let's recall Nunez's reflection. Everyone knows the first thing Adam did with the animals that the Lord formed out of the freshly created earth. The first sign of his dominion over them was to give each of them a name. Until Adam assigned them their names, some say the animals did not exist. If we listen, sense, and take in the work downstairs, we may receive signs from the outside that closed circle. If we are not so afraid, if we know the war is over, we may hear that Gyre is a haiku recited from a helicopter above us. Gyre is a handwritten note left on the path in front of us. Gyre is 1,000 leaflets scattered between the 7 mountains, leaflets within a singular message. Gyre is an encouragement to stay long enough to be found by the moment of presence within presence, which is, I forgot to say, Wadada Leo Smith's term or phrase, and to take the time to let it seed a revolution, circles like following the vibrations in the coil downstairs in our imagination. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nina. That was beautiful.
Thank you.
I have the same to say as last time. If there's any urgent questions now, we can take a few questions, but there will also be a possibility to ask questions in 15 minutes when we have all 3 speakers here with us. So I will be asking that and handing the mic over, and then we will need a 15 minutes break to put out some chairs. Are there any questions?
Yeah, and don't feel pressure. We'll all talk together afterwards. Or if I don't know if it's open downstairs, and then you can also take a moment to revisit the piece.
Then we'll reconvene.
Oh.
It's just the name of the musician, the artist you mentioned.
Wadada Leo Smith. Wadada is spelled W-A-D-A-D-A. Leo Smith. Yeah, he's played at the Molde Jazz Festival many times. Yes. All right.
We'll meet in 15 minutes. first, our two speakers, Nina Sun Eidsheim and Gyre Tomlinson, and Camille, who's in the middle. I won't do a large introduction for Camille. I just wanted to say that we're here because Camille Norment has transformed Bergen Kunsthall's 4 main galleries into this one expansive sonic experience, the exhibition titled Gyre. We can experience this one more day in the gallery below us, but a part of these exhibitions is also this space that we're sitting in right now, the Constellation Room, a space that provides a research situation with records and publication that create a context for the works in the exhibition. Both Nina and Gary's publications are part of this library among many other inspiring publications and records, and this event and conversation will be part of creating this ever-growing constellation. We also talked, and it's very welcome to ask questions also during this conversation, so it becomes a conversation with the audience, and we plan to be heading downstairs for a drink at 5 o'clock to celebrate this little guy that I have in my hand. So I'll give the words over to Camille. Thank you.
Hi, hello, welcome, and I just want to thank everyone. I can't believe it's the last weekend already. Just so grateful to Bergen Kunsthall for this opportunity to work with their wonderful, boisterous spaces. And if anyone complains about the acoustics from here on, just tell them it's full of possibility. And of course, I'm just so grateful that Gary and Nina could be with us here today, and because their work has been so important to me in my thinking and my research and my puzzling and my questioning. And it's so appropriate that Nina started with, puzzling over the words, not having the words to talk about the work, because that expresses such a kind of a state of fear that I find myself into in quite often, even today, walking into the space for the first time after many weeks, wondering who I was going to meet in each of these galleries. Not the people, but who were these works now? I knew them at one point. I thought I did. We were very well introduced. But who were they today? So I reintroduced myself, just, hi, how are you? Who are you today? Most of them I felt I knew them in some way, in many ways. Some of them had changed, or there were things that I wasn't sure if they had revealed to me all at once. There were new discoveries. Some had transformed. The coil has a halo now as an expression of the time past, and a reinforcement of the dialogue that it's having with the works on paper, the iron filings, and the cycle of the rainwater. So here was the cycle of sound in a broken cycle of transformed train track and building material that itself was deteriorating onto the ground. That was new, unexpected. I hadn't met that before. And I'm using words now, but after being reintroduced to all of these works, I left the gallery and then remembered why I was here and was struck by fear. But will I remember the words? I know the work, but will I remember the words? So I ran upstairs into the kitchen and I opened my laptop and I started reading again. What did I say in the publication? What did Nina write? And Gary's, how can I remember the words? This fear, because the place of knowledge that I had been just really immediately brought back into, being reacquainted with my works, were completely outside of those words, of this language for me. And I don't mean to say that with any kind of arrogance or super knowledge. It's just the way it is. And it's something that I try to achieve. It's a state that I love the books and all the research. I take in knowledge, but to create the work, I have to lose the words. I have to put them aside. Something has to transform them into a different way of thinking and understanding and feeling myself through. So all of this knowledge, all of this linguistic, semiotic, these words have to become metabolized before they can come out as art. And this is nothing new. This is what artists do. It's what musicians do. It's what writers do. But here we are trying to find words to articulate this process, which is outside of words itself, outside of the language. And I find that a very interesting spiral, because here I was inspired by hearing Nina and comforted because I started reading through the publication. I made lots of notes to help myself remember the words. And I thought, okay, it's okay if I don't remember them, because, she says she doesn't have them either. Good, we're in the same place. But also, I have to say, I was so, I love hearing maybe we have 7 or 8 different pronunciations of the title of this exhibition, today. And that's fantastic. I haven't a clue either. I don't know how it's pronounced. I found the word looking for something that felt like what I was working with. Something that was that felt like the feedback loop, something that moved, that made my body make this movement. So that was a process of looking for a word that had a sense of movement to it. So I found it. Did some research to make sure I wasn't misusing it somehow, and I thought, okay, that this sort of the reference to oceanography is great. It's not what I'm doing here, but I love that reference as well. It's another very important Earth cycle that's being disrupted now. And the fact that even though I read the phonetic pronunciation and I practiced pronouncing it, I listened to Google and Safari pronounce it for me, I don't remember what it said. And nobody else seems to know how it's pronounced either. And I think that's great, because as a word that represents this knowledge that we're trying to grasp that is beyond words, I think it's appropriate that the title is also sort of slipping away from us. We can't grasp it. We don't know, is it Gyre, Gyre, all of these things. I don't know. It's that approximation, that attempting to come closer and closer to something that you can never actually pin down, you can never actually attain, I think is maybe one of the most important messages of the show, and I thank you for bringing that to us. And I think the second thing I wanted to say is also related to this in terms of unthought. Cognition without conscious thinking, again. So it's another way of trying to understand things and processing things beyond the word, or it's the things that we do. Most of our brain is occupied with this unthought all the time, much more than conscious processing. So we make our way through the day unconsciously. Most of the decisions that we make are unconscious. And I think that I'm quite interested in this in relationship to, of course, the body and everything that Gary was sharing with us today, the whole evolution of the human consciousness, especially the relationship to sound. And here gets to the great unknown, which is so fascinating, because I don't really have a message, a meaning, a conclusion. I have more questions. And so part of this discussion is about the questions that that Gary and Nina have been sharing, but also that you have. If we understand sound as synonymous to vibration, and as we mentioned in the previous platform's presentation or discussion with Axel, that vibration is thought to be perhaps one of the impetus of the Big Bang, or the thing that got everything in motion. So therefore, it was sound that is the origin of this great kind of energy, constant flux called life. So sound, life, but also body. Because sound needs a medium, that vibration, and we talked about this before, but it's been brought up here again in different ways by both Gary and by Nina. The fact that the sonic requires a body to actually move, to be alive. There has to be a medium. And it's not just a human body. We're not talking about a body. It can be a table. It can be a molecule. Okay? So with these ideas, one of my questions or great curiosities is, how can we utilize this great evolution of human cognition and the relationship to sound and kind of re-imprint or utilize the sonic to help encourage positive evolution? You know, what kind of impetus can we put in the environment to be taken back into our bodies that might help us out of the terrible situation that we find ourselves in? I really feel that the power of the sonic is greatly underused. I think what Nina has shared with us with this pinning down of pitches, that's fairly new. Even deciding that, you know, A4 is going to be 440 hertz, or is it 442 hertz? You know, it's only a few decades old. You know, before that, sound was much more fluid, and everybody was a welcome and open musicer. Okay, and this, I feel, is something that we have lost, and I would love to find a way to gain that again. You know, you might say it's maybe Snapchat or something like that, you know, where people are singing and putting it on there, but I'm not sure that's the right direction. But how can we encourage the embrace of sound again for everyone as something that we have a responsibility even to participate in as human beings? Because there's something there that I think that we have lost and that is underused. And I think I would like to believe that looking at the power that it has in, say, spiritual context, for example, there's a reason why sound is integral to those as social power situations. And I don't mean power as in authoritative powers, although when they become religions, that's what they become. But if we try to grasp at this intangibility of what spirituality might be and the relationship between sound, there's a one-to-one relationship in many of these cultures. And I think there's something that is there still for us that we can utilize. But I wanted to start this conversation with this sort of broad semi-question to see if you, Nina, or Gary had any thoughts here on that. And of course, we're open to questions from you all as well, as we just sort of puzzle through together what the possibilities are with sound.
Send it to you.
Anybody?
Well, one of the things that is so clear from the installations downstairs, and it is so eloquent in the installations downstairs, is that you need, for sound, you need a medium. Sound is, after all, a kind of mechanical energy, as the physicists would tell us, right? It's not a radiative energy, it's not gravitational energy, it is a mechanical energy. You move an object, and those vibrations are sensed by lots and lots of kinds of organisms. But not all kinds of organisms. There's a great new book that came out by a man named Haskell called Sounds Broken and Wild, I believe it's called. Yeah. This is a man who is capable of sitting for 8 months watching a square meter of a forest floor and then writing a whole book about it. He's one of these crazy ecologists who has the focus to really kind of sort of see what most of us walk over and never see. Very, very interesting writer and a very good writer. And he gives us a history of sound on Earth. Now, think about what the evolution of sound might mean as a phrase, right? Does sound evolve in a real way? Well, if niches evolve because they are absolutely bound up with organisms that are evolving in them, and if sound is a part of niches, then sonic niches would evolve too. But he traces, after all, eons and eons, several billion years, when, in a sense, sound existed on Earth because there was an atmospheric medium in which, volcanic eruptions could be heard. But in a very real sense, sound didn't exist because there were no organisms alive. There were billions and billions of microorganisms, but no more organisms alive that could perceive sound, right? So in fact, he finds some paleontologists to tell him, well, when were the first sound producing organs? When did they evolve? And the answer for now, though it will probably be adjusted, there's an ancestor of a cricket, a fossil from 290 million years ago, that has a scraping mechanism on it that clearly was a sound-producing mechanism. There's nothing earlier than that, right? So the notion that you've got more than 3 billion years of the evolution of life on Earth with no sound production and maybe sound perception earlier, but not for a long, long time in this evolution. All right. This is one of these crazy things that Gyre Tomlinson is doing with a perfectly reasonable question. However, to get back to that question, sound is about a medium. Sound is about a space in which a medium can be moved. And one of the fascinating things that Nina brought up was, now to kind of make a real weird loop, was the question of prepositions. Prepositions are words that place us in a space, after all. They're about placing us in a space in ways that other words tend not to be. And there's a reason why, whenever you learn a foreign language, the hardest kind of word to get exactly right is the prepositions in that language, right? The language aside from English I know best is Italian, and you can speak Italian fairly well for years and years and still be getting your damn prepositions wrong, right? That's because it's so hard for us to be aware of our placement in a space, it seems to me. And for us we are always moving through spaces, but the notion that we are taking real cognizance of what it is to be in this space as opposed to the space 5 steps from now is something that your exhibit makes us focus on. Your work, all of your work, it seems to me, all that I know at any rate, makes us focus on that. And it's there somehow that the location of the body, the sounding body, is to be, I don't know, triangulated in on or something. Oh, that didn't make any sense, I'm sure. But there you go. Great. I hand it over to you, Nina.
And I think the reason, we have a word for those types of words, I don't know if it's the reason, or let me make it a statement. We have a word for those words that we use to organize ourselves or make understanding of where we are placed in space. And it is indeed the hardest. I still make mistakes in English in terms of prepositions, because it's we can be placed like this, but different languages would imagine it differently. Right? Some would say, maybe make gender be part of the prepositional landscape, maybe age, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. So maybe the table would be more important, or somebody would ignore the table. To me, I hadn't thought about that when I thought about prepositions for writing about your piece, but as often is the case when you move something from one sphere to the other, which both of us are trying to do, I think, in our kind of languaging works, we see where the blind spots are and the assumptions are in one language. So when we are really just feel the prepositions in the language, or we don't think about them, we just perform them all the time, we are not very aware of where we are placed in space. Then moving into another language, we become aware of it. We become aware of our inability to place ourselves within that language, and also we become aware of how we do that in our own language. And as we have been saying, I think that's what, in a physical way, Camille's work does. We walk outside, there are sounds, there are objects, and we know maybe more or less this town, or we know towns. So we're going to just walk through it as a native of buildings and roads. But then when we walk into the space downstairs, we're no longer, it's no longer our first language. That space, I think, is not our first language. I'm not sure if maybe that's, that doesn't sound right to you, but what I just mean is that you allow us to again become aware of how we are placed in things, or make us question it, because we don't know what prepositions we would be using.
Right.
And that's, I think the best works do that, that they make us aware of things that we're just, like you're saying, we most of our energy or most of the things we do in life is unconscious, right? But we can't walk in an unconscious way into those spaces. So you allow us to be conscious again for moments, right? And they're just like these kind of breakthroughs, I think.
And spirals of sort of diving into the sort of being taken over by the unconscious experience and then coming out again. And often saying, oh, what does it mean? Or how does it work? You know, you see that again. But, you know, if you can get past that again and just kind of lose yourself in it, it's a very interesting loop. And I find myself in it often as well. But I want to talk about perception in relationship to sound. Because here we have words again. And maybe it's a case of being limited or overly constructed by what the definitions of the word are. What is sound and what does it mean to perceive? And what or who perceives? Does this table perceive anything? What does it mean to perceive? Because I think it's important, because if we talk about a time when even the earth existed, when there was nothing around to produce sound, by my definition of sound, I would question when that could possibly be.
No living organisms to produce sound.
No living organism, yes, okay.
Yeah. Plenty of geology.
Right, okay, living organisms, okay. So now we're on the same page again. Because I think it's quite, one thing that working with these kinds of materials has made me re-question again is that of perception. And what does it mean to perceive? What does it mean to be cognitive of one's environment, you know, in the unthought way, the unconscious way? So, for example, the way roots, you know, perceive their environment and, of course, you know, make decisions, you know, on the genome level, you know, how to respond to them. That's a type of cognition that's taking in information from the environment, analyzing it, making a decision, if you will, reacting to it, and producing something else. So I think it's quite interesting, and a lot of this thinking has been used to help us understand that we cannot consider ourselves necessarily the only sort of intelligent life forms, you know, on the earth. You know, this is nothing new, but it's still a very important discussion now. And I think thinking about the vibration and how we are all connected as well, as Nina was bringing forth, is connected to this unthought, because everything is vibrating. And if we perhaps think of how to reconnect to the power of the sonic, you know, that we were reconnected to before. What drew me to your book, The Million Years of Music, which was the first piece that I read, was the wonderful account of the hand axe and trying to produce that and the sound that it created. And this was long before language. And please correct me if I get things wrong. But we can even just imagine the sound that was produced by trying to chip a rock into a sharp object. And the gesturing of trying to teach this, you know, to others by production, and the rhythm that was produced by default. And perhaps this rhythm was most likely unconsciously absorbed into the body, because it simply happened out of necessity. They're chipping the stone because they found out that we can take the meat off bones much faster before the saber-toothed tigers come or whatever, you know, and then we have a greater chance of survival. But in doing that, this rhythm was produced and something was absorbed into the body. And I think this question of the intense presence of sound and rhythm in our bodies is so fascinating. And I don't want to understand it on the neurological level. I think it's fascinating, but I don't want that kind of knowing. And I don't think that kind of knowing is really the answer, because this is sensory knowledge. We have to promote knowing through the making and through the sharing and through improvisation and collaboration. And this is what I'd like to find more ways to encourage in environments where cities are cutting music out of schools to save money, or you have auto-tune because nobody's allowed to have an imperfect voice. It's better to sound like an artificial entity than to sound like a real human. I think these things are incredible losses, especially in the face of artificial intelligence, which we're all obsessed with now. I mean, it's the talk of the town. But now I think it's very vitally important to reinvestigate that knowledge which is inherited in our bodies over generations and generations, and changing all the time. And how do we make use of that knowledge in the face of intelligences that are going to outdo us in every other sense, tomorrow if somebody makes the wrong, move. I mean, it's really that crucial. And I would like to see perhaps, sound and the relation it has to the body to have a role in that. Our defense, the defense of, I don't know, it sounds a bit much, but I think there's something very important there that we have to utilize.
It seems that, just to finish up on AI, just with a thought that it seems that the only people in the world, and not even all of them do it, who really, in the world of AI and high technology, who think that there is no difference between deep learning of an algorithmic form and what the human brain and body enable us to do, are a few software engineers or AI engineers themselves. Everybody else realizes there is a huge and crucial difference. But we can't name it. Again, the language fails us. In fact, the knowledge fails us. And what this conversation seems to me so much to be about, it goes back to the question about ethics that I was asked before by Karen, I think, yes? The arrogance of knowledge is everywhere around us. It drives me, I see red when I see people, engineers, who are saying we can engineer our way out of the climate crisis. We don't have to worry about fossil fuel because we'll have cloud seeding machines and all this, and we'll work it all out with engineering and more technology. Are you kidding me? But the arrogance of knowledge needs to be opposed by an ethics of limitation, and at every moment. The question of different languages, for example. We think about when you get the texture of a language that is not your own, and you begin to dig into it. What you really realize is how differently the world is parsed by that language than your own native language. And these differences are not very large when it's a question of Norwegian or English, but they're there. But when it's a question of Nahuatl or English, they're very large, right? When it's a question of Chinese and German, they're very large. And all of those differences should make us sit back and say, yes, our language fails us regularly. Our language is hugely, is a tiny partial take on the world, and other languages take the world in different ways, right? And I don't know. So an ethics of limitation of our knowledge, as opposed to an ethics of arrogance about our knowledge, or just a simple arrogance about our knowledge. I don't know that arrogance is ever ethical, is it? Probably not. No.
Yeah. I'm thinking also even just about the phrase artificial intelligence, and I think others have noted this, that just to call something that is connecting it immediately to humans, because you mentioned like who we think are intelligent, right? Yeah. So we are giving it power, we're letting it do things that we wouldn't have if we called it algorithms, advanced algorithms. We would have had a very different relationship to that phenomena had we given it a different name, if Adam had not come and interfered, right? And I think, so much of this is, I think we see this in different languages, as have been noted, but like how we are alone, how we conceptualize what it is to be alone and what it is to be together. And who are we together with? Who do we conceptualize that we can be together with? I think maybe from the way I've been taught the world works, we can be together with people, maybe with animals, like with, and then we learn that on the farm, you're not, you have that moment where you understand that somebody's interacting with animals on the farm, but suddenly they are also being slaughtered. So then we question that relationship. And what does it mean to be, how do we really conceptualize aloneness and togetherness? I think those are kind of enormous questions that goes to artificial intelligence. I think it goes to perception. Because imagine if we perceived aloneness as something completely different, or togetherness as, some cultures would do as really being with the water, with the grass. We could not do the same things. But if we have this separatedness, then there are operations we can carry out that we wouldn't have if we were together with. And it's their propositions, it's perception, it's the way we imagine things, or ourselves and the world. I'm curious what all of you think about all this, or what comes into the conversation for you.
Yeah. Jeremy.
Yeah, I'm thinking about your title the first time. Your title, Camille, the first time I ever encountered that word decades and decades ago when I was a child, because it occurs on the second line of the poem Jabberwocky by Lewis Carroll, where it's a verb, not a noun. He says, "'Twas brillig, and the slithy toves did gyre and gimble in the wabe."
Yes.
The poem is kind of nice because what it does in language is it doesn't mean, but it sounds, which I think is kind of very beautiful.
Yes. Oh, that's wonderful. I know that it's funny. So that might have been sitting in my subconscious somewhere, because I do know that poem, and I had not remembered it at the time. I was searching for words, and even encountering the Yeats poem, it still hadn't sort of immersed from the depths. And yes, this I love that. Yeah, the sound as opposed to the meaning is I think very valuable. It's something that I hope we can hold on to or make more use of. I saw another hand.
Hi. So this might be an odd one, and I'm sorry to be the party pooper, but we've been talking about the sound of the beginning of the universe and the lack of language, and then it gets me wondering what the sound of the end of the universe will be like. Sorry. When this, maybe it's just my brain, but then it also got me thinking about this waste pilot plant somewhere in the United States. I don't know if you know about it, but I read this article. So it's basically where we have to dig down our nuclear waste. And it's really dangerous if you dig it up again earlier. Like, it has to be there for like 10,000 years. We're also talking about a lot of years. And they're struggling to find some kind of signing or pictograms to communicate. Like, how do you communicate with the population 10,000 years from now to tell them that this is like super dangerous if you dig up on this bit of ground? And then I read that they have some solutions, and they're all over the place. One is the monk painting, because it's like this scary face. And another one is breeding cats that change color of their fur if they get close to nuclear waste, and then including fairy tales and myths about the cats, so that generations will get scared of the cats that change their color of their fur. Anyway, so it was a long but I was wondering now, working with this exhibition with Camille, none of these suggestions that I read about had anything to do with sound or vibration. And then it got me thinking about, wouldn't that be the perfect solution for this? So I don't know if it's a question, but it's kind of like I have this beautiful panel in front of me. So do you have any ideas of what this could be like for this pilot waste plant?
Oh, wow. I'll have to give it some thought. But it's interesting. What immediately came to mind is the fact that there is a graveyard for sirens also in the United States. So maybe they can be combined somehow. This is a collector of sirens, of all sorts that have somehow stopped functioning. And there is an enthusiast who has been collecting them for decades, and then just he has a plot of land and just placing them out in the land. So it's possible to actually go and visit the siren graveyard. So maybe he should donate, some of his broken sirens to the area. But of course, what we have to anticipate is that it probably won't be too long before no one would recognize what that shape of a siren even is. You know, we can't really perceive that yet, but we know something like that is coming, you know, is likely to come. So the difficulty in trying to project, or predict rather, how our perceptions, how our knowledge will change is just impossible. It's really, that's one thing that makes it difficult. But of course, the breakdown of you know, sound in terms of something that we produce mechanically or technologically, that technology is going to change in 3 years. So unless there's somebody whose family over generations and generations is appointed to have this task, and maybe that's what it should be. I mean, some guardianship group, you know, to take care of these plots, because something has to make sure that translation from one generation to the next generation happens. And I can't imagine what kind of signage would really, I mean, they will have to really do a lot of deciphering if anybody bothers it. It's going to be some archaeologist trying to, you know, write, you know, their Ph.D. paper on the Munch painting, trying to understand what kind of song was coming out of that voice, you know, the beautiful aria that's happening. I mean, anything could be interpreted on that painting, you know, when we don't, when we sort of dismiss our understanding and knowledge of it, even though it looks scary, somebody could interpret it as, you know, the singing so vibrantly that the whole world is vibrating. You know, I mean, anything could happen. And the opposite effect, I said, oh, well, let's dig it up, and we can all join in the song. No, but it's, I think with that, you know, the future is a problem of translation, you know, I mean, and there's a lot that we are going to lose quite rapidly. Think of what was lost from your grandmother's generation to you, you know, what my grandmother knew, how to live off the land, that was lost between my mother and she, even though she grew up on a farm, and that gap is just a few years, you know, in terms of human span, but it's life or death, you know, it's generations of knowledge that was lost, and so that's becoming shorter and shorter. You know, we're losing things, like, and we're forgetting things much more quickly.
And I guess the forgetfulness is only a problem when they're new, dangerous sites, like a nuclear site, a waste site. So maybe that should be our kind of checkbox. You know, do we have to worry about how we communicate this to generations 10,000 years from now? Then don't do it. Don't make that thing that will get you into that situation. Now we of course have it already. But it reminds me of, you know, the golden record, which was sent.
Exactly right.
Yeah. I don't know. Do you want to talk about it?
No, please. No. Go on.
No, I don't have too much to say about it. But it's like a communicative problem, right? Like you're imagining. So it was a record like this. It was made of gold.
Analog record. It was sent off on one of the Voyager spacecrafts, which is now well beyond. Well, it's not beyond the solar system, because now we understand that the solar system extends really far out there to the Oort cloud and beyond and so on. But it's very, very far beyond Pluto. And exactly the choices that were made when you look at it, they were trying to be very clever, and Carl Sagan was very much involved in devising this, and they were trying to find symbols of some sort that would communicate, as they thought, universally. There's a good book downstairs in the that came along with this exhibit called Alien Listening, by the way, by Daniel Chua and Alexander Reding, that kind of talks at length about this golden record. But the limitations at stake, right? How do you really communicate with extraterrestrial intelligence of some sort? There are more interesting ideas than they came up with, it seems to me. For instance, any extraterrestrial intelligence that had high technology would have to know about the periodic table. And so here we are with a commonality, the periodic table. How do you use that as a communicative means, right? They wouldn't necessarily have to know about numbers the same way we do, though probably some sort of numeracy would be necessary. But so there are possibilities there. But it's so interesting that what they did settle on, so much a part of it was a collection of earthly music. On an analog recording with instructions how to play the analog recording. Very parochial selections of a collection of musical selections in the end. They tried to be wide-ranging, but it's still pretty parochial. So why would how would we think, so this gets us back to music, is the point. How would we think that music could communicate? Obviously, doing something in any human language would be bound to fail, or at least would not be necessarily the way to start. So why did they think that music would be the way to start? Well, because music is some sort of communicative means that is, I don't know the preposition. In relation to language, it is above language, it is below language, it is around language, it is something different than language, right? From the terms of semiotic theory, one would say that music is all indexes. They're all signs that point to other things. Every moment of musicking is a sign that is pointing to the next moment and leading to expectations that might be fulfilled or might not. Language is all about symbols, and they have to have conventions attached to them and everything else. So I suppose they thought that musicking, precisely in its non-linguistic nature, would somehow communicate more broadly. A lot of presumptions about hearing and perception and so on and so forth that they have no grounds for. But nonetheless, it's interesting that they settled on music, isn't it? As a non-linguistic thing.
Yeah. And they're imagining two senses being present, right? Vision, because they had all these symbols trying to communicate what this thing was and what to do with it. And then, if they were able to play it, audition. But as we know, our body, we listen with our entire body, really. So, and we certainly make meaning with our entire body. So if the body had different senses, if it was configured differently, we wouldn't hear and see and sense the world. I don't know, like there are all these amazing animal books now, but like if you were an elephant, how would you, experience Bergen? If you were like, it would be a completely different existence, which goes back to perception again. There is this amazing Roald Dahl short story about a woman who was married and her husband was very abusive, and he finally died, and he had promised his brain to science. So she managed to get his brain in vat home to her living room, and there is this brain with just the two eyeballs somehow popping. And so the premise is this, that she's doing all these things in front of this brain with the eyeballs that he was very controlling. He would not allow her to do. So they see like she's smoking and she's drinking and she's this and that. And the descriptions are just so vibrant. Like she's saying, like she imagines the eyes kind of twitching and being very angry. But I think the point is a kind of sadistic story. But I think the sad point is that brain would not sense anger, would not be angry. I don't think it would have the capacity for anger, because we need the whole sensorial material existence to have all these feelings and to make meaning. So that's, I think, for your perception piece is interesting, and also like children, just something very simple, like the height. Children walking into your space versus a tall person, like how the whole space is very, very different. I don't know if you have stories or kind of like how different heights, for instance, just affect the way that your work.
It's something that, of course, you think about how high is a chair? How long is a bench? When is it a bench or when is it a stool? These kinds of things. And then, and there's a design primer that has I forgot the name of it, but just what the diameter of a doorknob should be, all of these, and it's amazing. And I thought, my God, that's just, and for years, designers were actually looking to that. It's like, okay, I have to design a chair. The book says it should be this height, so that's where they started. But I don't know what those numbers are. I have to think about where I am, and there's height. But there's also just kind of feeling your way through things. I mean, that's really, this feels about right, and it would work in Scandinavia, but it might also work in Italy as well, And, I had a piece where I actually, sort of changed it by 3 centimeters, from Venice to Oslo, just on the advice of a carpenter, just on the height of benches. And I thought that was, very interesting, but maybe too precise. But how can we how can we avoid that? You know, you're thinking of an average body that doesn't exist, you know, so you are in one environment where there is more of a semblance of an averageness to think towards, you know, than in another environment. But in terms of interacting with the work, you know, people see that there's something that they once, I think it's more than feeling that I can put my body on this. It's more the recognition that I am allowed to put my body on this. You know, this is what I've really seen, you know. So, or lie down on it. I mean, it's like a domino effect, and that's been the most interesting thing, you know, to see one person, you know, lying down, and then suddenly people lying down on all the benches, you know, or to come in and people just kind of walking around and, you know, not sure if they should touch the art. One person sits down, then they all sit down. You know, it's quite fascinating. And because you mentioned choreography, and this is really part of the choreography that happens, but it's also based on just instinctive habits, you know, which do change from environment to environment. And I think that's part of the I guess, the generative capabilities or the malleability of the work, as in any kind of perceptual experience, is that it is different given a different environment, given a different set of bodies. You know, that, as you wrote in the essay, the audience is absolutely necessary to have the works exist. It's not complete without a body there. It's not, the feedback will happen, you know, things are happening in the environment anyway, you know, so I could say that the bodies are there because, you know, the humidity, the moisture in the air, you know, water drops are bodies, you know, that affect the sound, the humidity, the heat. But if we talk about audience and human bodies, then the work is not complete without that, even though, you know, the moisture bodies are affecting it as well. So again, you know, when we think about this in these terms, and as you mentioned, the interconnectedness, you know, that we are interconnected, you know, my physical body might be manipulating the feedback, but the water in the air is already doing that as well. You know, what is the relationship between my body and water drop bodies? You know, it's all connected. You know, they're touching me now. They're being absorbed through my skin. You know, we are affecting each other, and that absorption is drawing out the air. So everything is entangled, and it's having an effect, as both of you have been saying. And this entanglement is, of course, full of ethical questions that we are just beginning to grapple with because we are in so much trouble. But I think that if we look to some of the gifts through the sonic, for example, as feedback, you know, that... Wow.
Who did that? Who did that? Come on.
That was right on. Wow, almost scary. Feedback. Okay, only once, but that interacts with the environment and necessarily so to be what it is and to evolve. But also improvisation. You know, it's a very, very simple thing to look at. You know, musical improvisation, improvisers, and we often think of it as belonging to jazz, and now contemporary music, you know, is full of improvisation as if it's something new. But again, improvisation constituted the vast majority of music production for most of human existence. And it was intuitive, and it was something that everybody could do. And now I'm speculating because I'm sure there were limitations. You know, the guru could hold this, you know, drum and not that one. But, you know, but it's to say that musicking does belong to all of this. And you might not think you're a singer, but you don't have to be a singer. You know, maybe your role is a percussionist. You know, there was something for everybody. And I really believe that this vocalization, this resonance, is something that is also belonging to everybody, which is part of this work in gallery too. And, you hear some of the voices sound, like they might be professional singers, others are clearly not. You hear the voice cracking, you hear, inhales and exhales. This is something that is a practice, is a sound that our bodies are ready to produce. And it's a production that has been grabbed and held onto by spiritual practices across the world for such a long time. So there's something there. And you might not feel comfortable sitting in the gallery and, moaning along with the benches, but some have and some do. You don't have to do it there, but maybe go home. Maybe try, there's something there. This is something that we're already doing. So the next time you kind of moan in, oh no, not again, think, I just, that, oh no, why did it get so guttural in the throat? Because it was trying to reach the diaphragm. It's trying to vibrate your body. This is where that resonance comes from, the pain, but also the ecstasy. And so we are connected to, and this is a very immediate vibration, that we all produce. And I think it's fascinating the way we can think of it again in sort of broader material forms, as you talk about so much in your book, Sensing Sound. That is something that connects us all, and we can look to it as ethical guidance in a way, and feedback. Yeah. Do we have more questions or comments from the audience?
Please.
Yeah.
Hi. I was just curious a little bit, Camille, about in your exhibition, about the relationship between the visual aspect and the sounding aspect, because visually the objects are almost perfect. They're perfected. They're polished. They are bent out of shape by force. But the sound is wild, unruly. It's unperfected. Yeah. And if you have some thoughts on that, on the relationship between those two things.
Yeah. This exhibition is willfully full of paradox, and because I think paradox also belongs to this kind of quest, this searching that we are engaged in, and the sonic finds itself in the middle of. And it's also, this kind of perfection I relate to modernism in a way, high modernism and progress. And so it's the underbelly is perhaps the sound. Its voice is actually, rugged and faltering and telling a different tale in a way. So these things are working in tandem. It's a spiral. Chasing itself. That tension is there between the polishedness. If we think of in Gallery 4, the work Fittizen, for example, the large, perfectly formed stainless steel sphere in the corner. That is diagonally opposite of a work of two meditation balls that's being held by a Tibetan singing bowl. And so the everything but noting, even there's so many, personal jokes in there. Just the dropping of the H is also just a very specific social reference to cultures who drop the H in English language are considered sort of lower cultures than those who pronounce the H, So, this paradox, but that's another story, but it was very kind of important to this. So this kind of quest, spiritual quest through the sonic. You have the singing bowl, you have the boding bowls, and they would deny this kind of perfection, the antithesis of it. And yet we have in the opposite corner sound that is derivative of the cosmic microwave background that I've sampled from YouTube and zoomed into so close that I can identify patterns, and then mapped my own sound onto those patterns. So that's another kind of searching, but that's a searching to know and to own, in a way, this kind of perfection. So this dichotomy here is on the one hand, these spiritual quests are more about unknowing. They're often about forgetting. You have to abandon a certain degree of cognitive knowledge in order to achieve this sort of spiritual unknowing that you are achieving. And yet we cannot get past the shiny things, in a way. We love the shiny things. I love them too. And Catherine Newsuf, who has written a very powerful text for the publication. She's working on a publication that's called Shiny Things, and it's talking about this seduction as well. So the seduction is also part of this the tension that's in the work. Because we are easily seduced by these shiny things, and tempted by them. And it's also causing our downfall. These perfectly formed, fragmented rings, they are also deteriorating, in their movement. So it's a purposeful paradox there. Long answer, but yeah. Any other questions or comments? Well, thank you so much for being with us for this long, wonderful symposium. And again, I'm so grateful to all of you for being here, and for Gary and Nina, and again to Axel and Celia and everyone else at Bergen Kunsthall for this opportunity to create this work and to have these discussions with you all today. Thank you.
Thank you.